And if you don't mind, maybe you can give us a brief overview on who you are and how you got to where you're at with Build the Story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love being here. Thanks so much. It's been great, meeting you and Brandon, David, and the the entire community of folks that you bring together. So for me, I spent 25 years in the Air Force. So the first half of that time was a fighter pilot flying the A-10. The second half, I was a military diplomat. I became a Russian speaker. I lived in Central Asia. Near the end of my career, I spent a lot of time. I spent a year deployed negotiating with the Russians over Syria as we were fighting the air war against ISIS. And then it was time to do something else, right? I left the Air Force, and my wife and I moved back to just north of Birmingham, Alabama, where we live now. We both knew that we were going to be starting businesses. The cost of living is a lot lower in Birmingham, Alabama than it is in Washington, D.C., and our families are here. We're able to, spend time around them, and it has been great. But for storytelling, as a fighter pilot, you tell lots of stories. We say that they only have to be 10% true, though, and if they're funny, we'll waive the 10% rule. But really, what we're doing when we're telling stories is we are sharing experiences. I was a pilot training instructor for a long time as well. And one of the things that we would tell the students is that you will never live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. You have to learn from the mistakes of others. And the way you do that is through story. So what I learned over telling those stories as a fighter pilot and then teaching and using stories in my teaching, I was a speechwriter for a while as well, is that if you can get really, really good at telling stories, and getting really, really good doesn't take too much, but if you can get really, really good at telling stories, you can communicate better with people. And as you start applying that into business, you can't be an entrepreneur and only be yourself. You have to communicate with other people, whether it's a customer, whether it's a supplier, whether it's somebody who's designing something for you, whether it's a co-founder, somebody on your team, or an investor. You have to get an idea out of your head and put it into someone else's head so that they will take action. And stories are the way that humans have been doing that for over 100,000 years, and it still works today.
Yes, yes, and yes. Thanks for that. Wholeheartedly agree about storytelling. I was looking at some of the stickers and notes that you had back there.
Oh yeah,
Let's say facts fade and stories stick.
that's
Is it?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
stories sell, people tell.
yeah, that's true, right?
Yeah, going down the list. So I have a question.
Yeah.
Sometimes I hear folks say, well, my business isn't that big, so do I really need that much of a story? Who needs a story?
I mean, if you have to speak to another human, you need a story, right? So, and I'm not overstating it. If we think back for a minute, right? Humans 100,000 years ago started telling stories, and you look at the cave paintings; those are illustrations that sort of go along with the story. But the only way to transfer knowledge was to have one human telling another human essentially a story about where to find food, a story about how to avoid danger, a story about how to escape from the tiger that's attacking you. And when somebody starts sharing that story, they would pass it on to the next person, and now they have it, and they'll share it to the next person and the next person.
Yeah.
We didn't even start writing stories down until 5,000 years ago, and we just started using PowerPoint about 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
when you're communicating with someone, if you pack your message inside of a story, that other human is designed to receive the message in that way, and it works. It works, and it sticks with them, and it's something that becomes a part of them. Whereas facts or copy, either you take action at the moment you read it, or you don't. You turn the page, and it's gone forever. But stories stay with you.
Stories do stick, yes. What do people get wrong when it comes to crafting their story? What do you see time and time again that people are usually generally not seeing it through the right lens?
So there's two things. One is they overcomplicate the process,
Mm.
right? They think in terms of movies maybe that they've seen, or screenplays or novels, which are very complex stories that are interwoven. You've got special effects, you've got a score, you've got all these other things that are going on. But if you're telling a business story to a potential customer, you don't need all of that. You don't have time for all of that. You don't have the money for all of that. You just need to communicate. So make it simple. And then the other thing is related is that often our stories get very tangled up. So you will have the idea that you want to convey, And as a business owner, you're telling maybe the story about how you came to build this business, or you're telling the story about a customer that you helped. And there were other things that were going on at the same time, and they get all tangled up in there. So that there were things that were important to you, but they're not important to the story. And so you have to strip out all of those other things so that the story you present to your audience is one clear golden thread from beginning to middle to end that delivers a message that they can't miss. And the more you put other stuff on top of it, the more likely it is that they're going to get distracted, or that they're not going to interpret things exactly the way that you mean for them to, and your story is not going to work.
Could you give us an example?
Yeah, sure. So if I'll think about maybe one of the clients that that I worked with, and I don't tell other people's stories, so I'll sort of put them together. But it'll be maybe a coach, for instance, and this coach is trying to attract some new clients, and like, why did you become a coach? And they said, well, I worked at this one company, and I didn't have a good manager, and also there was some family stuff that was going on at the same time, and I had this big project, but then the project wasn't going well, and eventually I got fired, and then I got into coaching and began doing this other thing. Like, well, most of those first details don't matter, right? Most of those first details, really, you just want to communicate that you had a struggle in identifying who you were and what was important to you, and therefore you weren't able to focus your effort on those things until you got a coach, and you learn to straighten those things out, and now you have focus and you can accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. It doesn't matter where you worked. It doesn't matter what you were doing before. All of those challenges that didn't impact the story don't matter. But when you're talking to a business owner, for instance, there's lots of things that are in their mind that are happening at that same time, and it's really hard sometimes by yourself to say, yes, that was important to me, but it's not important to my message. It's not important to this story, and therefore I should just cut it out.
Yes, yes. Keeping the hero, right?
Yeah, I mean, so here's a place where I disagree with Donald Miller, and he's a best-selling author, and he's a great marketer. He sold so many books. But one of the things that he says that people repeat every time you talk about story, on LinkedIn, is make your customer the hero of the story. But here's the thing: like, we don't want to be heroes. I don't want to be a hero. You don't want to be a hero. None of us woke up saying today's the day. I'm going to be a hero today. What we want is to stop hurting. We want to stop the pain that we have. Every business is a business because one person pays somebody else to relieve their pain. If I can make it clear to you what is the pain that I relieve, and it's a pain that you have, one, you're going to give me your attention, because nothing is more interesting to us than our pain at this moment. And if you look at Daniel Kahneman's work in Thinking Fast and Slow, we take bigger risks, we go to greater lengths, we do more to stop hurting than we do to become a hero. So focus the story on the pain that you are going to relieve. Allow your audience to see themselves inside that story, and you're going to have their attention. You're going to be able to convey your message, but people get all twisted up trying to follow the story brand framework and say, well, I've got to make my customer the hero. When I go to my doctor, I want my doctor to be the hero. I want the doctor to heal me. When I go to my mechanic, I want my mechanic to be the one that's the hero fixing my car. I want my lawyer to be the one that gets me out of the court case. I don't want to be the hero. I just want to stop hurting. And especially like in a B2B context, it gets really tough to figure out, how am I making my customer the hero in this story? So stop doing that. Allow your customer to see their pain, see that you have the solution to their pain, and you're going to have their attention. You'll be able to deliver your message.
I love it. I love it. What would you say is the goal of a good story? Would you say that is the goal of a good story, is to help them see how you solve their pain, or how do you define the goal of a good story?
Yeah. So the goal of any story is to have my audience create the meaning that I intend. Right? Stories are devices to make meaning. It'll happen to you today. When you go through the day, somebody will say something that happened, and the question will be, well, why? Like, why did that happen? So why did you start doing, you asked me the very first question you asked today was, well, why are you doing this? Like, why is this the thing that you got into? Something bad happens and we want to know like why.
Mhm.
When we ask the why question, we are begging for a story. And what we want is a story that makes sense to us. So if we think about the, get the facts fade, stories stick back there. When you convey facts to a human, we take each of those facts individually and we think critically about it. Mostly we say, well, does that apply to me? Then we say, like, is it likely to be true? Does it matter? But as you keep talking, you've delivered another fact and another fact and another fact, and I'm still thinking about that thing. But with stories, the way that humans receive stories is as a whole. So if I start telling a story and you know that I'm telling a story, you're going to delay your judgment. And when you get to the end of that story, the question you're going to ask is, well, does that make sense? Did the characters in that story do the things that I would expect them to do based on what I heard in the story? And if I've done it right, you've seen yourself inside that story all along the way as well. And you're judging like, oh, would I do that same thing? Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's what I'll do. And an effective story is one that conveys the meaning to you that I wanted to convey. So that now it's not just me having this idea about my business, about the value that I provide, about the solution, about the need for a revolution, if that's the thing that I'm doing, but you have that same view in your mind as well. It's not hypnosis. You're not going to necessarily agree with me, but you're going to see my perspective and you're going to see how I could come to the conclusion that I came to.
Yeah. What what is your take on how vulnerable people should make themselves when they're crafting their narratives? I see a lot of folks say, well, I'm afraid of sharing too much, or if they really knew this about me, then they wouldn't want to do business with me. What's your take on that?
So the first question is, do you want to be trusted? If you want to be trusted, then you've got to be vulnerable. So when I talk about trust, I define trust as trust is believing when given a chance, you will not do something damaging to me, right? Believing when given a chance, you will not do something damaging to me. Trust is a choice that we make. I can't force anyone to trust me, and nobody can force me to trust them. The opposite of trust isn't just distrust, it's control.
Hmm.
So if you are not being vulnerable, then we're not having a discussion about trust. Like trust is only a thing if there's vulnerability in the equation as well. So trust does a lot of things in humans, but one of the things it does is it leads us to take more social risks, right? It bonds couples together. It leads to feelings of friendship, and it inspires this feeling of trust. And what he found in his research was that the fastest way to build trust with someone was to treat them as if they were trustworthy.
Hmm.
This is huge, right? The fastest way to build trust with someone is to treat them as if they are trustworthy. When you treat someone else as if they are trustworthy, they get the shot of oxytocin in their brain that says, Tim's the kind of guy I should trust. Paul Zak then goes on to study stories. And what he finds is that stories can do the same thing. That they do these studies with nonprofits that tell stories, and they compare a story-based advertisement versus a fact-based advertisement. And people always give more money in the story-based advertisement. And he could actually measure the levels of oxytocin in their blood. And what he found was that when you tell a story that includes vulnerability, that you can trigger that same release of oxytocin in your audience. So telling a story where you express your vulnerability is treating your audience as if they are trustworthy. They get the shot of oxytocin, they trust you, and now you're the type of person that they'll do business with. And I'll tell you, I start out workshops that I do telling a very vulnerable story. Often on LinkedIn, I'll post very vulnerable things, and nobody has ever said, Dan's a jerk. Like, who is he for up here doing this? Every time you're rewarded with other people sharing their experience, other people saying, oh yeah, that same thing happened to me. I see how that could affect you. Just to wrap this up, like everybody all the time, we're going through life looking around saying, am I normal? And you're looking at every other person to see, am I all right? Am I normal? And when you hear the story of somebody else that has your same struggle, your same pain, that had your same reaction, you're like, yeah, Tim, he's like me, so maybe I'm okay. Maybe I am normal. And now I trust Tim, and we're able to work together to build a network, to build a relationship, to build a friendship, and it just works.
Yeah, I feel like people get lost a lot of times in the marketing of it all.
Yes.
You know, hashtags and funnels and ads, and you need all that stuff and emails and landing pages and scripts and VSLs and closers and setters and whatever is happening in the world. I feel like we so often walk away from the story and we're just thinking clicks, conversions,
Mm-hmm.
CPMs. How do you integrate story into that entire universe of marketing?
Yeah. So it depends. Like the people that I work with, the founders and the business owners, like they are like their business is them. Like it is personally connected to them and who they are and their personality and their values. When I go to the grocery store and I need to buy a loaf of bread, I don't I don't care too much about who the baker was. Now we do have like an artisanal bakery here, and I'll go and I'll buy his bread, but now it's him. Like he's the person making it, and I'm interested in him. But for a commodity, I'm just interested in, does it fulfill the need that I have? Good enough, and I'll buy that. So if you are selling a commodity, then there's still room for story because you want your audience to be able to, your market to be able to see themselves using it and to see how it's going to apply for them. But if your ability to sell is based on your customers' trust in you, then the personal stories become more important. And often when I help people on LinkedIn to write their stories and to convey their stories, we are writing for a very specific audience. For instance, I do some work for a woman who owns a construction company in Pennsylvania, and she's trying to get oil and gas projects that she can handle inside her company and profit from. But there's only a few people on LinkedIn that have oil and gas projects. So she's not going to get this huge distribution for her post, and she's not going to get 1,000 likes on something talking about how she crushed a previous oil and gas project. But that's not her goal. Her goal is to speak to the 2 or 3 people out there that have an oil and gas project today that can call her up and hire her. So if she gets no likes, but 3 leads from people that have the projects that she wants, like that's a win. And
Yeah.
there's just no other way to think about it, I think.
Yeah. Let's run through a few scenarios.
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll go rapid fire here. If you were building a story for, let's say, an e-commerce apparel brand,
Mm-hmm.
how would you approach building a story? Let's say it was in action sports, and the person's like, I just don't know how to tell my story or how to convey this, or maybe I'm afraid to show people. What would your advice be to that person?
So the first thing that I want to find out about is their audience. Like
Mm.
who are you selling to? And very specifically, what what is the pain that your apparel will relieve for them? So is it that you are making clothes that I had a conversation just last week with a guy who has a company making a basketball shoe that prevents ankle injuries. It's specifically designed to prevent ankle injuries. So I'm like, all right, we know that the pain that you are relieving is this fear of somebody who's not a professional athlete. They just want to be able to walk back into the office on Monday and not be limping in, to not have this ankle injury. So now let's talk about the change that your product can create for them, that it takes away this fear. It helps them to not be to play at their best, but to not be worried that they're going to hurt themselves. It allows them to play the sport that they love. It allows them to continue to do something to be in shape. And your shoe and you are making this possible for them by changing the way that the shoes operate for them. And when you do it right and you speak to the pain of that customer, they see themselves in it, and they're like, yeah, I'm worried about limping into the to my meeting. Like that would be horrible, and this shoe prevents that. All right, I'll at least hear you out, and I'll check it out and see what you got.
Okay, great. Next one.
Yeah,
Tech startup that's looking to raise $1 million from investors, working on his pitch deck. How does
yeah.
he incorporate story?
So you've got to. It's always about the audience, and your investor audience is not your customer audience. Like your customers want to relieve their pain. The pain that your investor audience has is they want to make a bunch of money so that they can raise more money for, for the next round. So you've got to make sure that you make that pivot in your mind, that the reason that a customer is buying your thing is not the reason that an investor is going to invest in your business. But still, I need to talk about, in the beginning of the pitch, I'm going to use a story that talks about a customer using my product to relieve their pain. Because one of the things I have to demonstrate to my investor is that this is a pain that hurts enough that enough people are willing to pay to relieve it. And when you do that, now you can make a big business. So I'll start off the pitch with maybe a 1-minute story about somebody who is the ideal customer for this product and how it relieves their pain. It frames everything else inside the pitch, and now the pitch goes much better.
Okay, last one for you.
Yeah.
I know we had mentioned executive coach a little earlier on, but we have a lot of independent coaches and consultants in this forum. How do you incorporate story?
Yeah. So the coaches are probably the easiest people for me to create stories with, because their business is 100% them and the skills that they bring. It's a high trust business. When you hire a coach, you are hiring this person to coach me to make me better. So when I work with coaches, one of the most common stories that we tell is sort of how they got into coaching. And usually that story is, I had a struggle. I tried to figure things out. Often they found a coach themselves. This coach helped them to make this transformation, and now they fell in love with it. They love helping other people to make that same transformation, and here's where you go. Every story, regardless of whether it's for an e-commerce company, it's for an executive coach, or it's for a tech startup, has a core that is just 3 parts. And that is, things used to be like this, something changed, and now things are like that. If you do nothing except give, I call it the micro story, those 3 pieces, you're going to be a better storyteller than half the people on the planet, and your content is going to reflect that.
Dan, you're chock full of gems.
Thank you.
I appreciate it so much. I want to open up the floor to some Q&A. And you've been very generous with your time here. But before we do that, can you let everyone know how you work, how to work with you, and where to find you?
Absolutely. So I'll drop my my LinkedIn into the chat there. That's the best place to find me. I put content out usually 6 days a week, but on the 21-day challenge, I was doing 7 days a week to get that content out. It's all about storytelling, and it's all about how to build a business and communicate with people using story. But I work with people really in 2 ways. One is that I write the story with them. So we do like a 1-hour interview. I'll collect all the pieces that I need to be able to build a great story. Sometimes we'll build like a LinkedIn 4-pack, where you get a 4-pack of stories that you're able to deploy there. Other times it'll be like a 3-minute signature story, the type of story that you would tell at the beginning of a pitch, or on a call like this when you're maybe introducing yourself, or on a Zoom call when it's one-on-one and you have somebody who is a lead and you really want to demonstrate your value to them. And we do that just on a per story basis. And you can see everything about that on my website at buildthestory.com. Or I also have a program where I teach people on a subscription basis how to build these stories for themselves. And you can also find that on the website. And that's just like a $35 a month subscription that includes the course. It includes a great community that's giving you feedback, and it includes coaching calls with me as well.